Okay, bless you. Say it's wonderful to be with you this evening. Welcome to the Shepherd's Chapel. We just have something real special for you this evening, and I know you're going to enjoy it. I want you to get a shot first, if you would, of this little book, The Strange Parallel with Zebulun. I think you're going to enjoy it. This picture you're about to see is based upon this book. We have it available here at the chapel for a $10 donation. If you would like to have one, wait first. See the movie, see the film, and see what you think. I'll tell you this, God's prophecies are exact, are clear, and are very, very specific. I know you're going to enjoy this film immensely. Are you familiar with where your ancestors came from? Are you familiar with that history that concerns God? Then you're going to learn from this film a great deal about the travels of our ancestors. Could have something to do with you. You know, I find it fascinating, and I hope that in a not too distant future, we're going to be able to put some movies together here in America, even tracing those footsteps. The first movie will probably be made in a city not too far from here, an area called Tahlequah, where certain travelers many years ago came up the Arkansas River and left signs. Let's investigate them. Let's see what America itself has to say in the archaeology, the writings of people long ago. Well, you're going to find here jewelry and writings of people long ago. Again, we owe our thanks to E. Raymond Capp, a great friend of mine, an archaeologist, who has dedicated his life to finding God's truth proved in stone, in facts, upon this earth. So let's just all sit back a moment, won't you? Let's enjoy the film. God bless you. It's good to see you this evening.
There were 3 children from the land of Israel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. They took a trip into the land of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. He took a lot of gold and he made an idol. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. But the children of Israel would not bow down, not Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. You couldn't fool them with a golden idol. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. But the king, he put the children in the fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. He heaved on the coal and the red-hot brimstone. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Now the fire couldn't even burn the hair of the head. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. They were talking and laughing while the fire was jumping round. Meshach, Abednego. So the old king there, he yelled, "Hey there," when he saw the power of the Lord. And then they had a big time in the house of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego.
Could there be a more familiar countryside anywhere in the world than Holland? You want to go to Holland for your holidays, but it's so flat. Flat, yes, but it's the most charming, the most picturesque flat country you ever saw. Holland is a gay little country, all chock full and mirror smooth. A windswept country of cool-headed but warm-hearted people. It's not often that you get presented with an opportunity to have a holiday with the added stimulation of a little research work thrown in, but Freddie Albeck, enjoying a few days break from film and television work in Denmark, bought a copy of a new book, Strange Parallel, which presents some surprising evidence on the possible origins of the Dutch. Strange Parallel inspired him to buy a ticket for Holland in order to check out the story for himself. Once upon a time, in the hot, dusty lands of the Middle East, there lived a great and powerful king ruling a rich and prosperous people. So rich was he that other rulers came many hundreds of miles just to see this great sight. But all power corrupts, and it wasn't long before Solomon's kingdom began to crumble and the nation became divided against itself. In the 8th century BC, Tiglath-Pileser and the Assyrians came down like a wolf on the fold and deported the northern part of the kingdom en masse. They were taken away captive into Medo-Persia. Now, one of these groups of captured people was called Zebulon. All this happened in the time of Sargon in 722 BC, and later in the time of his successor, Sennacherib, who made his attack in 705 BC. And this is the account of his assault on Jerusalem. You can see it in the British Museum. Although the northern part of the country, whose capital was Samaria, was now almost a depopulated wasteland, the southern kingdom, whose capital was Jerusalem, went on living and trading as though nothing had happened. But they were to have a rude awakening. After yet another rebellious refusal to pay the agreed tribute money, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon descended on them like a ton of bricks in 586 BC, and the southern kingdom of Judah was taken in chains to Babylon. Years later, Cyrus, king of Persia, whose occupation of Babylon is recorded on this clay cylinder, allowed Judah to return to Palestine. Urged on in a fervor of patriotism by Ezra and Nehemiah, they started to rebuild the temple in 516 BC, which had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Some of the foundation blocks from this second temple form part of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. If you're thinking that this is likely to develop into yet another history of the Jewish people, bear with us a moment longer. For this is not Judah's history, but the story of northern Israel's wanderings into northwest Europe. A long, long trek over hundreds of years. Now here's a real-life detective story. What happened to the missing northern kingdom of Israel? Circumstantial evidence points to a slow mass migration over many generations from the Caucasus and Asia Minor into the coastlands of the North Sea, the Baltic, Scandinavia, and the Netherlands. As though to mark their passage, they set up great unhewn stone monuments right across Europe and as far as Britain. Some specifically state that they originated in the Middle East, as do the Scots in their Declaration of Independence. One of the difficulties in tracing this missing nation is that they were known by several different names. The Assyrians, for instance, knew them as Beth Cumri, or Gomri, which comes from Omri. At a later stage, they were also known as the Gimera. In the British Museum is the famous black obelisk of Shalmaneser. On it, there's an inscription showing Jehu, captured king of northern Israel, paying tribute to Shalmaneser. And the caption says, "This is Iyawah, the son of Kumri," that is, Jehu, the son of Omri. In northern Persia, a great rock carving at Behistun shows that the Persians knew these Gimera as Sakar, which comes from Izakar, or House of Isaac. Yes, the Israelites call themselves the House of Isaac as well. From Isaac comes the word Sakaseni, the sons of Isaac. We know it as Saxon. Sassenheim, the home of the Saxons. When this flood of migrants finally arrived in northwest Europe, many of them settled in Holland. Kimswerd in Friesland and Kennemerland, an area in North Holland, owe the origins of their names to the word Cimbri, which derives from the word Cymri. Now let's backtrack to the Gimera, alias House of Omri. Aided by a push from the east, called variously Getae, Goths, Scythians and Celts, northern Israel spread over Europe from the Danube to the Baltic. The Greeks had a word for them, Kimerioi, in English, Cimmerians. In 600 BC, the Celts were established in Central Europe. The northwestern fringe of this same ethnological group is today's modern Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway, Denmark and Holland.
So I'm a Danish Protestant Jew? Oy vey.
Not at all, Mr. Orbeck. This is the whole point of our story. You're probably a descendant of northern Israel, not Judah. Maybe from the tribe of Dan, as you're from Denmark. The starting point for this expedition, the old market town of Middelburg. Thence northwards across the broad inlets separating the islands towards The Hague and Amsterdam. The first port of call, this map shop at Middelburg, proudly displays the Dutch royal coat of arms. The Dutch have always excelled at map making, and in the days of pioneer exploration, all Europe came to Holland for the best, most accurate charts.
The light of evangelism illuminated these islands shortly after the times of the apostles, and has been shining brightly ever since.
A page in this 17th century chronicle of Zealand shows 1st century deities, one being a local so-called goddess called Nehelenia. Nahal was one of the ancient cities of Zebulun and means green pastures. Nehelenia comes from the word Nahal. Since the earliest days of civilization, when man first made himself a cup to hold water, a jar to hold grain, or a blade to cut the hide from an animal, basic designs have changed little. Throughout the ages, the workmanship has been refined, decorated, strengthened, but a cup is still a cup, whether a simple earthenware bowl or a goblet of gold. So it was with jewelry, with which to adorn himself and impress his neighbors, and indeed some designs have changed little. For the wife, Freddie? Or the girlfriend? 2,500 years ago, you would have given her jewelry just like that.
Hoeveel kost het dan, mevrouw?
Deze ketting komt op 935 gulden.
Hoe oud is het, mevrouw?
Nou, deze is wel ongeveer 50 jaar, zeker wel, ja.
Dat is een traditioneel.
Ja, dat is echt een traditioneel.
Hartelijk bedankt.
Tot de dienst.
The obvious place to check out this information, the Middelburg Reference Library.
Sir, there could be a link between this steel-lumped jewelry and ancient Hebrew jewelry. Is this true?
It is possible.
Jewellery such as this, as is often worn by the older women of Zealand, is similar to jewellery found in the Black Sea area, an area closely connected with Israel's early migrations.
For some people it is fijn dat het succesvol is.
In an old chronicle written by Adrian van Schalk in the 16th century, and in many other old books as well, the Dutch are called Celts, Cimbri and Scythians, and are described as being descended from the Hebrew. Even the name Zeeuwen, or in ancient times Swaven, the name of the people in this area, is almost identical in sound with the Hebrew name Zebulon. This is the Mosaic blessing to the tribe of Zebulun, that they shall succour the hidden treasures from the sea. The English lecturer John Wilson noticed this strange parallel between Zebulun of Israel and modern Holland and mentions it in his book. The word Zebulon is made up from 3 Hebrew consonants. There being no vowels in this language, the consonants are Z, B, and L. These 3 letters, Z, B, and L, each have a special meaning in Hebrew. Z, Zayin, means a hook or hooking. B, Beth, a home or dwelling, and L, Lamed, means movement. Hooking, dwelling, movement. Zayin, a word implying the action of raising up by means of a hook, which is exactly what so many Dutch windmills do. Hooking up water from one level to another for drainage purposes. Beth, a home or dwelling, and a more delightful place to live would be hard to imagine. And Lamed, movement. The dwelling with the movement which hooks up water. Zebulon, Holland. Veera, once a busy seaport, is now a quiet backwater, beloved of all those who like messing about in boats. It's a dreaming village now, but was once the Dutch end of the cross-channel packet service. In the days of the wool trade, when fast clipper ships ran between Australia and northwest Europe, the Scottish wool merchants built their solidly prosperous houses on the quayside at Veera. Middelburg, Veera, Zierikzee on the island of Schouen. Stepping stones in the trail of evidence.
Over my head, there's music in the air. Over my head, there's music in the air. There's bound to be a God somewhere. Over my head, there is color in the air. Over my head, there's color in the air. There's bound to be a God somewhere.
Zebulon. after the floods on that terrible night of February the 1st, 1953, which inundated most of the island of Showen, the possibilities of damming the broader inlets of the sea were discussed. Some of the devout fishermen in the devastated areas firmly believed the floods to be a divine judgment on Holland for wrongdoing, and quoted the book of Isaiah, which refers to an affliction upon Israel by way of the sea. So that this disaster might never happen again, the vast Delta scheme received immediate priority, a scheme in which the main sea inlets were to be connected by a series of dikes linking the island areas together, usually with a main motorway along the top, each island with its own defense system. Look at a map of 13th century Holland. It's mostly holes filled with water. In those early days, the Dutch had to live for safety's sake on raised areas of land, as flooding by the North Sea was frequent. Gradually, these areas became linked together. They were called terps, and primitive dikes were constructed, enclosing large areas of tidal marshes. Today, Holland looks like this. Makes one think in terms of gold, silver, and precious gems. But to the Dutch, the real treasure is land. To the hard-working Hollanders, the real treasure is a field of tulips or a lush green meadow with fat Frisian cattle grazing where before was only the cold grey North Sea. Zebulun was to suck of treasures hid in the sand. That's what it said, suck. And frankly, the Dutch are the biggest suckers in the world. For Zebulun shall suck of the abundance of the seas. So wrote the old Hebrew prophet. The head of the population, Holland has one of the largest and most modern fishing fleets in the world. There's an old saying, every Dutchman a fisherman. Quite understandable, as he's solar far from salt water. It is sometimes forgotten that Holland in the 17th century was probably the world's largest sea power. One of the first regular long-distance shipping routes, that between Holland and Indonesia, was established by Dutch East Indiamen. A fleet provisioning station was set up at the southern tip of Africa, which soon grew into a settlement, a little outpost of Dutch culture, religion and language, and which developed into the richest and most prosperous country on the continent of Africa. According to Jewish tradition, each of the 12 tribes was allocated a precious stone. Zebulun's stone was a diamond, and Amsterdam is the center of the diamond cutting industry. port of Rotterdam is the greatest port in all Europe. Zebulon, a place of harbors, a haven. And the Dutch word for haven, hof, has exactly the same sound and meaning as the Hebrew word chof, the H and CH being interchangeable in the Dutch dialect, as in Hebrew and Gaelic. In the center of The Hague is the Binnenhof, another type of hof or haven. The Binnenhof forms a great square surrounded on all sides by the Parliament buildings, and in the center, the Hall of the Knights, where Her Majesty the Queen of the Netherlands opens Parliament. The Dutch lavish much love and care on their houses, and with so much fresh paint about, the Dutch paint industry must be thriving. And there's as much care and artistry on the insides as there is outside. At night, the Dutch leave their curtains undrawn. Perhaps they have nothing to hide, or much to show. A lot of care is devoted to the old and retired ones in Holland, and many of them spend the evening of their lives in the peace and quietness of these little havens, the hofjes.
Ja, ik ben wel in Holland geboren, maar in Friesland. Weet u waar het ligt?
Ja, dat weet ik heel goed.
Friese provincie.
She says she is very happy and contented and loves this place.
Zebulon, dwelling, Jof, hof, hofje, haven, dwelling, Zebulon. A strange parallel here.
Holland, a haven for ships, for the old, and for the persecuted. In the old days, there was a curious but widespread belief that a witch had no weight. The down-to-earth Dutch, perhaps mixing wry humor with realism, installed man-sized scales at Oudwater, to which the so-called witch, if you'll pardon me, could fly on her broomstick to escape the mob, and thus prove her innocence, or guilt if she weighed nothing. It's okay, Freddie. It's only a bit of fun. We know you're not really a witch. Oh. In the Middle Ages, Holland was to prove very much a haven for intellectual giants such as Spinoza and Descartes. Those with new thought, new ideas on science and art, and especially those whose opinions ran contrary to established religious belief. Amongst the world's great philosophers, Erasmus. Holland throughout the ages has offered refuge to those who have sought religious and political freedom. The Pilgrim Fathers came to Amsterdam after leaving England in their search for freedom to worship as they pleased, but soon left Amsterdam for Leyden, which they found a fair and beautiful city of sweet situation. During their sojourn at Leyden, the Pilgrim Fathers met for prayer in St. Peter's Church. Their pastor was an Englishman, John Robinson. Before leaving again for England and eventually the New World, the pilgrims held their final prayer meeting in this church at Delfshaven. fellows in the distant past to have noticed this strange parallel between Zebulun and Holland. On an old house front in Hoorn, a wall plaque states that in the 17th century, the Dutch saw themselves as Israel fighting Amalek in the shape of the invading Spaniards in 1573.
Den vijand die komt aan. Hij wil met Amalek gaan Israël verslaan. Hij komt met grote macht, maar God heeft ons gegeven ook Aarons en de Huurs, wiens namen zijn geschreven.
The Israelitish leader, Deborah, prophesied that out of Zebulun should come they that handle the pen of the writer. The art of printing, say the Dutch, started in Holland. Laurens Jans Coster, who lived in the 15th century, invented the first movable type printing press, a claim later made by the Germans to have been an invention of Gutenberg. The wonders of the printed word, and in particular the wonders of the illustrated Bibles, bringing to the common people a new light, the light of the message of the gospel. A gospel brought glowingly to light by the colors of Rembrandt's paintings. Some English writers in the 19th century noticed this strange parallel between modern Holland and ancient Zebulun, and others in the 20th century have noticed it and are recording it. These people, these northwestern Europeans living in the flatlands of Holland, are they descended through the ages from the people of Zebulun? For if they be of Zebulun, then they are of Israel, the Hebrews, of which Judah also is a part. And if of Israel, then the forth-tellers and prophets of old foresaw down the long corridors of time the 20th century, and past it, to a great and wondrous future when they would be leaders in culture, in the arts, and in the sciences. For Zebulun, it was foretold, should see the light first. A people destined to live once again in harmony with the Creator, in harmony with the immutable law of the universe, whose author, the ever-living, is the Ancient of Days.
Okay, we come to this 49th chapter. This time that Jacob has called in his sons and is issuing, if you would, the blessings and also the future in a prophetic sense. That these blessings and these prophecies, for you must remember in that 49th chapter, he said, I want to show you what's going to befall you in the last days. As a matter of fact, this was the first occurrence of it in the New Testament, Old Testament rather, and it would be 14 times that would be used. So you can trace, or the clues to tracing the various tribes, not that it is complete, but you can trace that and pretty well get a fix on where those tribes went after the 10 went north. And you see, what many people don't realize, that of Judah alone, when after the Babylonian captivity, it was really only a remnant. You can count them in the book of Ezra, a very small remnant, and at the Nephilim, not Nephilim, but Nethinim, that they took back into Jerusalem with them. Not even one Levitical priest. So it is important that you know the tracings. And as I promised that we would do in this lecture, I choose it to do in the next because it's going to be a short lecture as far as scriptures are concerned, because we're going to complete this great book of Revelation. And I want to share with you a quote and some of the depth of these various promises, these blessings. So let's pick it up with chapter 49 and verse 13, a word of wisdom from our Father. Let's go with it. Zebulun will dwell at the haven of the sea. Haven is one word that can be translated port, if you like. He's going to be near the sea, and he's going to have huge ports. And he shall be for an haven of ships, and his borders shall be unto Zidon. Of course, at the time of this writing, we knew where Zidon was. That no longer, this is not the haven that it was speaking of. We have a documentary on Zebulun that even in the history of the people there and in the ancient writings found there that identify this Zebulun. 14, Issachar is a strong ass couching down between two burdens. What this really is leading up to is Issachar is one that would rather carry the burdens of anybody than fight, really. That he would rather pay tribute to anyone to be left alone. Would we call him a pacifist? You bet. He is and was and still is a pacifist. 15. You can note the Issachar type usually by the way they speak, and you don't have to talk to them very long to have their number. Verse 15. And he saw that rest was good. Oh, it's good not to have too many problems. And the land that it was pleasant. Oh, he loved to work. And bowed his shoulder to the bear, and became a servant unto tribute. In other words, it loses a little in the translation, but what it means is he would rather stoop down to the load of doing the work and pay tribute rather than fight. That's exactly what it means. Unfortunately, when Satan is in control of this particular earth age, that can leave you with problems of actually, rather than simply paying tribute, to becoming a bondslave. Verse 16, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. This would come to pass in Judges 15:20. But Dan, unfortunately, well, let's take the next verse and it will identify him further. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, and biteth the horse's heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. Poor old Dan was beguiled into idol worship, if you would. In Judges 18:20, this is brought forth. And it would seem that the old serpent, other than Dan, become a part of him, that he could be sidetracked very easily. Verse 18, I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. Now, this is slipped in here, and it's for a very special reason. Regardless of the blessings and regardless of the identifying traits and marks, even down to their names, then we can see and understand that God arranged events whereby you can keep up if you will just use your mind and look at the peoples of today, the nations, I should say. Of course, there has been some crossing. By that I mean two tribes in one particular nation and so forth. Or, as a matter of fact, you take Canada and America, you see many of the tribes symbolized by Manasseh, as a matter of fact. Verse 19, Gad, a troop, with the word Gad meaning a troop, shall overcome him, and he shall overcome at the last. In other words, as a matter of fact, Gad was one of the foremost shock troops, you might say, in the taking of the land of Canaan. That's history now. It wasn't at this time. But he's always been a warrior and always good in the military sense. And he presses the enemy under his heel. He doesn't give him a chance, if you would. 20, out of Asher his bread shall be fat. Asher meaning the upright, if you would. And he shall yield royal dainties. He's going to be very prosperous. Asher will be. 21, Naphtali, a hind let loose. Do you know what a hind is? That's a deer. In other words, he's a warrior in the sense that he is fleet of foot, can move very fast, very rapidly. Be here and then be there. Maybe be somewhere where he's least expected. He giveth goodly words. Naphtali, as connected with Deborah in the 5th chapter of Judges, is one of those tribes that fascinate me when Deborah stood up and commanded, if you would, the legions. She was a judge over Israel, this woman was. Deborah meaning the bee, the queen bee, I say. And, of course, Naphtali was used in that fray. And what a lesson within it, that God uses whom he will. If God can't find a man to do anything, he'll use a woman and make the man ashamed. Even to the point that when the heads of the army, will say, refused to go except that Deborah went with them. Deborah said, all right, this is what God has to say about it. You're not going to get the reward of conquering the enemy, but a woman shall. And it was this time that Jael invited Sisera, the enemy, into her tent. Tantalized him with a little cool buttermilk. Come on, boy, have a cool drink of buttermilk. Here, rest your head, put this cover over it, and then drove a spike through his head. And Jael got the victory of destroying, the reward, rather, and the reputation of having destroyed the enemy. Again, God will use who he will. Verse 22. Here comes Joseph. Remember Joseph as Jacob's beloved son. Joseph is this son that Jacob, his firstborn, of the love of his life. And that love of his life, you will see this Joseph, that type of Savior in this book of Genesis, who saved not only Israel during that awful drought, but also saved all Gentiles that were present, being the perfect type. So listen and learn from the Word of God. 22. Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well. In other words, you take a branch that is set by a well where its roots can get into that seepage of the water. It grows and overflows like a vine. Well, let's read on here. Fruitful by a well whose branches run over the wall. Just takes everything over, but in double blessings. 23, the archers have sorely grieved him, and shot at him and hated him. And so it is with Joseph being that type of Christ. Then we see also that Joseph being, by having the double reward, in other words, by Jacob adopting both of his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and giving each of them a reward, he did not again bring forth the jealousy of the other brothers, but yet legally gave the first fruit blessings to this one, Joseph. And it goes back to Jacob, his father's time, even in the womb, when Jacob and Esau wrestled in the womb, even before birth. And God spoke to their mother and said, within thy womb you carry two nations. And you can see the blessings that were given to Jacob are carried forth in this one Joseph, who Ephraim and Manasseh, many scholars, this being one of them as well, we know that that makes up, in prophecy, Great Britain and America and all the Commonwealth members there too. And we see that their gates were promised that they would always control their gates, and so they do even to this day. Though they are being tried, they still control those gates, receiving that blessing. You see, our Father is in control. Satan can only control what he will on this earth, not heaven. The heavenly control comes from our Father and the host that overrides all and is not visible to man. Occasionally, God allows us a peek through, whereby we can see and understand. And what a blessing it is to be in that blessing of our Father, whoever you are, to receive that blessing, to claim those promises of the double blessing. All right? You're talking about the Americas when you talk about this blessing, the fruitful one. And time has proven it over and over, and it shall continue to prove it over and over. Why? Because of the allotment donated to it and promised by God way back in the 25th chapter of this book of Genesis. That Esau would live off the fat of the land, meaning away from the fat of the land. But Jacob would live in the fat of the land, meaning that land that would produce most. Now, Esau, at this time, his furthest southern border is north of our northernmost border. Well, that really isn't true anymore now that we've acquired Alaska from him, Esau, but for his own burial ground. But be that as it may, the blessings hold up. They are very true. And that's why it's rewarding to you to be wise enough to listen. Verse 24, and his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong. Strong by who? By the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. That's who. You've got God's blessings. You can't go wrong that way if you let him know you love him. And then we have a little print here. Sharpen up for me. For thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. The stone of scone, the stone that this one Jacob would rest his head on as a pillow, and then turn it into a pillar. That the windows of heaven would open and the angels would play and would communicate to the point that God would prove to his servants, I am with you.